And a very pleasant good afternoon, and welcome to season 2, episode 11 of the QCast. My name is Bob Quillman. Thank you so much to everyone that has taken time to watch the QCast episodes. I'm really pleased to be joined by the very talented head women's basketball coach of the UW-Oshkosh Titans, Brad Fischer. Brad, it's interesting, this QCast came about just this morning after a Twitter exchange that we had. Not a Twitter argument, not necessarily a Twitter debate, a Twitter interaction where I don't even know that we were disagreeing about anything, but we decided, hey, let's get together and talk, because Twitter only gets you so far. And at this point now it's about dialogue, and maybe we can help shed some insights on different angles of this. How are you doing? And thank you so much for taking the time to do this on zero notice.
Yeah, no, I'm doing good. I missed this week. I was part of the health and safety protocols that everybody seems like they're going through in sports, and I'm feeling pretty good. This is day 8 for day 7 for me in protocols, but no, I'm doing good. And like you said, I don't even think we were disagreeing on anything. I think the nature of this topic is all of us want to end up in the same place. We want to play games. We want to keep people healthy, and there's just so many angles to trying to figure out the best way to do that. And so I appreciate being able to talk it out and not trying to type it out and figure out where everybody's at. And I think we can probably shed a lot of light on how everyone is thinking about this.
I'm wondering, Coach, when you entered this season, thinking back to October when practice started, the football season went incredibly well. The fall sports, I should say, went relatively great in terms of the pandemic. You start basketball. Did you think in mid-October, when you and the Titans started practicing, that we would be here talking about this like we are today? Or did you think we were kind of past it and we were going to have a normal season?
I thought we were probably pretty past it. I think we've learned enough in 2 years not to be sure of anything and to say anything definitively, but I felt like between the precautions that we had kind of learned how to get through last year, even if you compare it to last year, we came back and played an 8-game season, started in February, on the women's side, we didn't lose a game on that schedule. So when you go through how the last 2 years went and go through last year, now more people have gotten the vaccines and things like that. We've learned more mitigation. We've just learned a lot, how to practice, how to have meetings. So yeah, I thought this year would probably go kind of similar to last year, where we try to do these certain things. Obviously, we knew go back on the road and overnights and things like that could add a couple more pieces to the puzzle. But for the most part, we felt pretty good and felt like we had things in a good place. And obviously this variant has changed things tremendously, but and being a winter indoor sport is probably, we underestimated what that meant versus spring, which was able to finish tournaments, and the fall. But yeah, I definitely didn't expect we'd be talking about it. And it's been worse for us in a basketball sense than really the last 2 years have been.
And you have unique perspective on this because of just the impact to your team. I always think about the schools that in these 3 seasons now have been, I'm going to use impacted in quotes. And what I mean is just teams that were really in the national conversation all 3 seasons.
Yeah.
On the men's team, Randolph-Macon, Yeshiva, the teams that were left at the table in the Sweet 16 2 years ago. Last year, they were great. This year, they're great. Your perspective looking back here to, again, being left at the Sweet 16, not being able to finish. You had a great team last year. You were one of 200 plus teams that played. Now this year, here you are, you're ranked, I think it's 18th. You have a great team this year. You're right in the middle of this thing again. I'm just curious your take, having a national powerhouse through all this, and just what it's been like going through the last 3 seasons in general.
Yeah, I had time to think about it this week because we had to shut down this week. We played at Whitewater on Wednesday night. I wasn't with the team for my own testing positive last weekend, but the rest of the team was good. And then we came back and started having symptoms with our team Thursday night, Friday morning. and basically just kind of had a wildfire outbreak. So I've had a chance this weekend to think, because there's no games, the scout report basically got put in the can for whenever we see River Falls again. And it's just kind of heartbreaking what some of these girls' careers are going to finish like. We've got an All-American first teamer that's came back for year 5. We've got a classmate of hers that's been an all-conference player 3 times that came back for year 5. We've got a girl that joined us last year to transfer back for year 5. And the hope when they made that decision and adjusted their schedules and paid for school for another year was, well, we lost these 2 opportunities, but now we get to come back and, things will be better and we're going to get to do it. And now here we sit canceling games. We canceled their senior day yesterday. So that part of it has been heartbreaking, but I also think it's given us a good perspective on where we sit relative to the world and how this isn't the most important thing, even though it feels like it when you're doing it. And it absorbs a large percentage of their time, our time, and our thoughts. But it's really, 2 years ago when we're sitting in the hotel in Michigan, getting ready to play in the Sweet 16, and it's our 3rd time in 4 years. We haven't been able to get past that round, and we're playing Loris, who we've played already that year, and feel like we've got a shot. And in that moment, telling those kids it was over and seeing that, but also knowing, now 2 years later, like, you get through that. Like, it hurts for a while and it'll always be out there, but it's not as important as some of the things people go through. So you get some perspective. So for me, trying to navigate this, like, that was probably the low point of, we've gotten to this point, and last year we won the conference tournament. So had there been a tournament, we knew we would have played in it. And, we've had all those feelings, and now it's it's changed my perspective of someone who only is, we got to win. We we're going, we want to go to a Final Four, to, man, now I just want to play games. And, so these games that were canceled this weekend, I've talked to River Falls and talked to Stevens Point, who's, we're supposed to play on Wednesday. And we're like, if we've got to play on a Monday night somewhere, and it's the 3rd game in 5 days or the 4th game in 7 days, like, I just want to get these kids games now. I just want to play. And that perspective of trying to figure out what's the best thing to do each day for our team or going forward. Like, at this point now, the winning is still such a huge thing for us, but there's a point of just being able to play these games and let them go do what they're here to do. And that's the part that makes these discussions so hard, because that's what we all want to get out of this. We all would love to have a tournament and have the moment that they all know their teammates from 4 years ago, 3 years ago, all had the normalcy, but it's just kind of been stripped away, and that part's been really difficult. And I think that's starting to wear on people. And I know in my seat, I feel like I've handled it mentally pretty well, and it's starting to get to the point where it's just getting hard, and it's been a challenge for sure.
And if we think about this point that we're in, it's really been building up over the course of a few weeks. It really has been the last 3 weeks or so that this is the Omicron variant and all the residual impact has blown up.
Yep.
We actually had a very normal November and most of December to this season, right? So this is something that's really just popped up. Before we dig into some things, would you agree with me? And I want to keep this positive for a second, that I think we're in a way better place than we were 2 years ago here. I believe I am not worried at all right now, and maybe I'm being naive. I'm not worried about the tournament getting canceled. I'm talking about the women's basketball and men's basketball tournament.
Yep.
I think we're going to do that. I also feel like that the toughest part of this thing is probably this 30-day window that we are in. And things will get better as we get later in January and into February. And things should get a lot better than they look right now. Do you agree with, am I being too optimistic about that? But I feel like there's a good path in front of us here.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I worry about saying anything definitively, but you could see, so we came back, Christmas was always going to be a worry for me anyway. Everyone's going back to their families. We're spread out probably about a 3.5 hour radius from Oshkosh. So our girls are going to west to Eau Claire, down to, the Dubuque area to Illinois. So we're coming from, everywhere. And I think, certain schools that maybe are spread a little bit further added some piece of that. So that was always a concern, but you could see it. So we came back and we played at St. Olaf in a tournament with Carthage, Dubuque, St. Olaf, and a couple of those teams had a kid or two that we were expecting to see that wasn't there. So you could kind of see the dominoes of that. Stevens Point canceled to play in the Wartburg tournament. So that was the first. So that's 3 weeks ago now. So I do think like there was that shift of when we got to the finals, very few teams had lost games at that point. Or we weren't worrying about any symptoms, so it's definitely been in that window. I mean, for our team now, we've had such a large outbreak. It's going to be hard, knock on wood, for us to have another one, just because there's not that many people left that will be part of it. So I feel kind of the same way, and I know our athletic trainer has said the same thing to me during this week of trying to figure out from my own stuff. And then all of a sudden, when we had these positives, like everyone's kind of feeling it. Our gymnastics team, we've got teams on our campus that all kind of got hit when they came back. So I agree. I think that there's a window here where we're going to have to survive it and kind of get through it. And then I'd like to think that that's going to kind of open up. And no one obviously wants to cancel a third tournament. So I think we're going to do everything obviously to avoid that. But I do think conference wise, we've had to cancel here yesterday and Wednesday. When we come back, if someone else in our league had the same issue and crossed and Stevens Point canceled yesterday. So I think, obviously one of them is going through a similar thing. I think each team is probably going to have their own stretch. And then my hope would be that we've kind of all went through it, and the regular season and the standings and all those things are not going to be clean. History is not going to show a clean 14-game schedule in our league. But I do feel like when we just get through this interim period through the end of January, when the calendar turns in February, hopefully we'll have some relief. And that obviously is the hope. And that's what I've tried to tell our seniors. Like, I'm going to do everything I can to get these games we're losing back. But we've just got a lot of basketball left, and your careers may end with 10 games in February when normally it would be 6 or 7. So, and they're like, let's, whatever, let's do it. We'll come back, we'll rest, and then we'll come back and we're going to play a bunch of games. That sounds good too. So I agree. To me, that's definitely our hope.
We're in the same place on that. I feel like everyone's head right now is going to, oh crap, here we go again. I would pump the brakes on that. I think that there is a bright picture in the future if we just let this play out. It doesn't mean we're not going through something tough. I guess the other thing, and we're talking to Brad Fischer, the head women's coach at Oshkosh, the Titans. If you're tuning into the QCast and you're looking for two guys to debate different sides of the pandemic, this isn't the show for you. I think that I don't know Brad that well, and he doesn't know me that well, but I could tell you this, that we both agree that the pandemic has been an incredibly terrible thing. It's not a hoax. It's a serious thing. Hundreds of thousands of people have died. Sure. Hospital systems have been challenged and blown up, and that's a terrible thing. Not to mention other illnesses. I think we both agree that vaccinations are a good thing and wearing masks when needed are a good thing. So this isn't one of these COVID debates where we're going to get into that stuff. I think, Brad, do you agree we're both coming at this from kind of the middle of the thing? Do you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't know if I said it to you in messages or even on Twitter, but as a coach, you don't really get your opinion. Like I agree with all those things you just said. And my wife and our family has been as safe and probably as I don't know, I guess I don't know the word I'm looking for, but we've taken every precaution we could for multiple reasons. And for us, for me as a coach, I've got, in this case, 18 players, their families, everyone else, who don't all share the same opinion as I do. So my opinion can't be what the Titans subscribe to. What we do has to be what's best for our group. And I think that's where some of the outside of what people think we should be doing or how we should be handling that rubs up against what we actually do. And the challenge is to try to figure out as a coach or an administrator what to do, because it's not as simple as, well, this is what I think, so this is what we're going to do. And I think that to me is the hardest part when I read and talk and people try to tell us, well, you should do this, or this is how you should handle it. It's not that serious, or it is that serious. And none of those things really matter when
Right.
you're talking about the scope of a team.
One kind of the conversation that this all started with, again, it was a Twitter exchange, a very positive one. I think one where we were probably more agreeing than disagreeing is, I had made a comment in reaction to what's going on at Illinois Wesleyan right now on the men's basketball team, which, I'm really close with. Just in talking to some parents and things who are frustrated with Illinois Wesleyan. Let me stress, I'm talking about one university's policies that I was reacting to, but Illinois Wesleyan's policy that a vaccinated asymptomatic student athlete is basically put in a quarantine for 10 days and shut down at that point. And my comment was, there's got to be a better way than that. That seems extreme to me. And, your response back was, I'll paraphrase it. It was, there's different ways to look at this.
Yeah.
Like there's the administration side of it, there's a fan side of it, there's a parent side of it. But as a coach, when you're charged with the lives of your student athletes, and that's not an overstatement, that's a correct statement, when parents and others have entrusted you with their children during their college years, that it's really not quite that simple. There's not like one way to do this thing. So expand on that, expand on your first thoughts, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah. And again, like I told you before we started, the last thing I want to do is feel like I was being aggressive and telling you that how that parent is feeling is wrong, or what you think is wrong.
And I didn't hear it that way. I did not hear it that way.
And I think there probably is a better way to do it, but there's, so the first thing I thought of was, well, what's your testing ability? Like, how many tests do you have? Do you have a limited test at Wesleyan in this specific scenario? Because I do think there are ways that you can test quicker to get out of the 10 days. But the first thing I thought of when thinking about that is, obviously the parents that are frustrated, I 1,000%, understand their frustration. Like I said, I've got a couple of fifth-year seniors paying for a fifth-year school. Like, I'm sure my kids' parents who have been doing this now for 3 years are incredibly frustrated that we canceled their senior day yesterday. But the first thing I thought of was the scope that parent has to look at this through, how it affects their individual kid. And even talking to recruits now who are seniors in high school that are coming to play for us next year, they've been dealing with this also for 3 years. So their entire, over a half of their high school career has been impacted by this. And same with our fourth year and fifth year. So I always understand the frustration, because the scope of how they have to look at it is, my kid is the one calling me so upset because they're shut down. Their team is still playing without them. Like, that's how I felt on Wednesday watching our Whitewater game from here, as my kids and my assistant coaches are out there. And I'm like, my symptoms aren't that bad. I could, wear a mask and all those things. And so I get all those. I also, the other thing I think about is this asymptomatic kid who they feel like isn't really a threat, is a teammate with someone who might turn symptoms and might get sicker, has, in our case, we've got, kids with parents that are going through cancer treatments and immunocompromised, and they probably need to stay away, apart from them, but we don't need to be sending it down the team. And even if an asymptomatic is still positive and can pass it, they're all living together. All of our players live together in some form, whether they're in the dorms or the house. So there's all these factors that go into, okay, ideally, if we could test on day 6 and kind of follow what the CDC has kind of laid out, and that player now is negative, is that an opportunity for them to get back in there with a mask or something else? Yeah, probably. But, I don't want to assume that Illinois Wesleyan isn't having those conversations,
right?
And that has been sussed out, and also, is a rule that goes to their other teams that are on their campus, and how do those teams all fit into the puzzle? So, for me personally, understanding that frustration, but also understanding the kind of the domino effect of how these policies are laid out. And, I was in a position yesterday, if we had played our game with River Falls, where I was going to be on day 6 and I was going to go in for a negative test, hopefully. And if I had been negative, I was going to be allowed to coach that game with an N95 mask on, and my symptoms have resolved. So, at this point, I'm feeling like I can do that. But we've also got players that are going to hit their day 6 and have that process. And we haven't even talked it out yet. Like, can a kid sit for 5 or 6 days now, not do anything activity wise, and then come back and practice a day or 2 and then go play a WIAC basketball game? Like, right. What does that do for their health? Because we had a case last week with one of our coaches on campus who was asymptomatic and went for a 3-mile run, feeling good on day 3. And ever since that run has been feeling terrible, body aches and all the symptoms that they didn't have, now they have. So, our trainer is calling all the track athletes saying 5 days, you cannot run. And we've just had this case of all of a sudden there's these symptoms popping up. And so there's so many pieces to the puzzle that, yeah, we're talking about, an asymptomatic player or 2 that now, instead of sitting for 5 days, has to sit for 10, and seems like a huge deal. And maybe there's a testing answer that, they'll test negative on day 6 and we can move them forward. But the domino effect of how that affects the rest of the team is a conversation I've spent more time and more minutes on the phone with phone calls this week than I probably have in 10 years. I'm glad there's no more minute plans on phones, because just trying to talk through all these scenarios. And we had kids trying to get booster shots on Friday before we had this outbreak. And, if you get a booster while you're positive, you can get really sick. So right. We had some fears of some issues there. So there's just so many things that, one parent with the phone call from their son or daughter saying, Mom, I'm good to go. And this is bull because I feel great. It's not their deal anymore. And that's, that was the biggest thing to me. Like, once you're on a team, it's not just your deal. And that's been the hard part, because it is hard to tell a kid that feels pretty good that they got to sit, and why that might be the best thing for the team. And like I said, these parents might be right. Like, I'm not saying they're even wrong. I'm just saying there's so many things that we got to think about in the wholeness of the team and how we're going to finish our season. And maybe the good part for us is we've had such an outbreak that there's no room left for another huge outbreak.
Right.
If you've got an asymptomatic or 2 that kind of stays hanging out and kind of keeps it in the circle, if they're able to pass it along, you may be dealing with it for the entire 2 months. So, that's the part that you sit back as a coach and you're like, God, I don't know what the right thing is to do all the time.
And we're talking to Brad Fischer here from UW-Oshkosh. And before we move forward, just a quick disclaimer is Coach works for a university. I'm just a guy who tweets about Division III basketball. So I am not speaking here for my alma mater, Illinois Wesleyan. I have the utmost respect for Mike Wagner, the AD, and Ron Rose, all the coaches, the administration. So I just want to, I think that's obvious to everyone watching this, but that's important. Coach, in terms of, I think this is a obvious thing to everyone now. Maybe it wasn't the first months of the pandemic, but when this thing starts spreading, especially this variant, the Omicron variant, student athletes or anyone in the world, you don't have to do anything wrong to test positive here. And so a lot of people, again, I think we're good on this, but boy, once one student athlete has it, these folks tend to live together. They live together in dorms or off-campus apartments or whatever. And this particular variant, not that the first one wasn't crazy contagious, but just to stress for the folks here, I mean, student athletes that get this, whether you're at UW-Oshkosh or Illinois Wesleyan or wherever, you don't have to do anything wrong to test positive, correct?
No. And actually, I think our team from start to finish, from when we started this, at that NCAA tournament to going through now, has been really diligent about protecting each other and giving up a lot of the college life that we all enjoyed, part of being in college. Like our players, especially last year, we're not going out and partying and hanging out. Like they lock themselves down, and we're going to get through this season. We're going to play these games and get to a conference tournament. And they've made a lot of changes to their normal life to try to protect their teammates. And, our team is virtually fully vaccinated, really trying to get through the booster round and do all those things. But even in my own house, I tested positive last Sunday. I would guess, based on how little we do outside of our jobs, that I picked it up somewhere on our trip to Minnesota. But my wife, we tested her every day all week, trying to figure out, because she started to show a little bit of symptoms. And I tested positive on Sunday. She finally tested positive this weekend. So, and we were kind of told too, like, if she doesn't get it in the first 4 days, she's probably not going to get it. Like, her booster basically is held up and we're good to go. Well, at the end of the week, she started to feel worse and then finally tested positive. So that's a 6-day stretch. So when you're talking about, even our team now, where we've got 3 freshmen in the dorms, we've got sophomores in an apartment together, and then we've got all of our upperclassmen in 2 houses. Well, each of those domains now has multiple people that have tested positive, and has 1 or 2 people that are still testing negative.
Right.
But then we've got 2 with symptoms that kind of remind me of my wife's situation, where we're just waiting now for finally it's going to pop, that their viral load is going to be enough to trigger that test. And, we've done the PCRs, we've done all that. So there's almost no way. They all got their own rooms, so that I know that they're all kind of hunkered down and just trying to wait it out. But not only are they not doing anything wrong, they're really doing everything they can, I feel like. And I think a lot of teams are in that same boat. And, I know, other teams have had, like I said, players missing, and they're doing the right tests to make sure the players they put out there are good to go. And that decision was just taken out of my hands because we fell below the number that you could even have to play a game. That, our league had determined, if you have 8 healthy players that you can trust, that are good to go, that you can put them on the floor and not be a risk to other people. And we were below that number, halfway through Friday. And Blake, the head coach at River Falls, we talked for 2 days about, this game on Saturday, because he had a player positive Thursday. They did all their testing. He texted me and said, good to go. I said, we are too. And 4 hours later, we were up in double digits in positive cases. Wow. So the nature of this entire thing, this variant specifically, and how quickly it spreads, no matter what you're doing to try to prevent it, is obviously unprecedented during the course of this pandemic. But it kind of speaks to the nature of, we've changed the policy in the conference. Initially, it was going to be a forfeit if you weren't able to come play a game. And because we're now looking at a situation where people are doing the right thing and still ending up positive, luckily our league kind of flipped the script on that. So now it's a no contest. And I think that took a lot of the pressure off of some of us trying to make that decision of, are we going to come over there? And even with Friday, we had all these positive tests, and I called Blake and said, we're not going to have the number, but I would feel uncomfortable if we had a few less, because we've got kids with symptoms that are negative today that I'm afraid are positive tomorrow. If we show up and you play, you're going to be in this boat. And that's what happened. We had 2 more positives yesterday morning that we would have been potentially throwing on the floor against River Falls on Saturday. And now he's going through the same scenario a week from now. And, that's the domino effect when, people say they're frustrated. Like, I get it, but I want to make sure that, we're not responsible for River Falls now sitting out for a week. And, he's probably going to deal with it one way or another anyway, but I don't want our team being reckless in the reason that's the case.
It sounds like the WIAC has a rule like the CCIW and probably most leagues. I'm not familiar with all of them, where do you have some kind of roster where if you've got at least a certain number of women available within that total, that you're supposed to be able to go play the game? Can you share what those numbers, is that a shareable thing?
I guess I haven't looked exactly when it ended up in writing. I got the call on Wednesday because they met on Thursday as athletic directors to kind of talk it out. And the number that we talked about was 8. And if you had 8 healthy bodies that you were confident weren't being put on the floor as people that might test the next day or might be carriers. But again, the problem with this variant is, if I've got 10 kids out, or 10 with coaches and players at that point, and we just tested positive the day before, I'm not super confident these 8 that we would potentially have left aren't going out there with the same kind of setup.
Right.
So that's where we ended up feeling. If we had 8 healthy bodies, we were going to do everything we can to get these games played. And again, it was taken out of my hands because we fell below that number. We only have 15 non-injured players that are even starting, the ability to play a game. So,
Right.
Our number's less than some other teams in our league, but that's the number that we had talked about. And honestly, I don't know, once it was ratified and thrown through, if that's where it for sure ended up. That's what I was told when we were going through Friday, that do you have 8? And the answer was no. So that was the end of the conversation about it on our end.
And just so people know, as coaches and athletic directors, administrators, they're trying extremely hard to get these games played.
Yeah.
But there are certain situations like the one you're describing with your team. And even though literally I don't know any details, but I know that Illinois Wesleyan is the reason for the cancellation against Carthage yesterday. And so something happened there with Illinois Wesleyan's men. And we know that everyone wanted to play a basketball game.
Yeah.
We know that it wasn't for lack of trying. And so we'll ask everyone to just be sensitive to how difficult this is for everyone involved. Wanted to ask you a little bit, Coach, about the pandemic in general and navigating how polarizing this has been. Oshkosh, Wisconsin, Bloomington, Illinois. I feel like I have a pretty good handle on the parents of your Titans and our Titans. There's people in both camps here. If we want to talk reds and blues and rights and lefts, whatever we want to call it. And unfortunately, the pandemic has become very political. And being an active Twitter participant, I see the dialogue on Twitter.
Yeah.
And I can tell you that, which parents are in which camp. And it's like a 50-50 thing here. As a head coach, you've got parents in both camps. You have students in both camps. How have you navigated that part of this? I don't know how you've pulled that off.
Yeah, I appreciate that our parents have allowed us to do what we feel is best for our team. And that's where I'll start, because I know I'm confident we have people on both sides. And again, I think I hope that the culture of our program has allowed some of that to happen, and understanding that once you send your daughter to us, like I think you said earlier, it's not overstating to feel like you have the responsibility of these girls in mind. And I will always err on the side of being more cautious for them, and thinking about the long term of and again, where the scope is of this basketball piece in these games, and winning and losing is, and compared to the big picture of their whole life. And are we working with a group that is probably less likely to have severe reactions and long-term effects? Yeah, we are. I mean, that's 18 to 22-year-olds are less likely to have long-term effects, but there's enough cases in our own building and across the country where it's that one kid, and until that kid is your kid, it's okay to think it's a big deal. But once it becomes your kid, it is a big deal. So I have to work under the assumption that one of my kids could become that kid. And if I'm not doing, and our team's not doing what we can to try to protect that, each of our kids, thinking from that standpoint, because we had a football player last fall in the season that they didn't play, that was an ER case, and going through all that,
Sure.
Looks just like my players, same age, same everything else. And if I don't try to look at it from that lens, that it's potential that I have one of those players on my team, that's not something that I'm comfortable living with, and making that phone call that one of our girls is in the ER here in Oshkosh because we were reckless with,
Right.
trying to get an extra practice in. Like Friday was a perfect example, because we're going through wildfire of all these positive cases. We've still got, 6 or 7 that could have been on the court to do a practice. If the basketball piece was the most important, those 6 or 7 could have come in and done something. But They could have shot around, we could have walked through something. And obviously we've shut down at least through Monday to give multiple days of testing to figure out where we're at. But, something as simple as that, like, you have to look through it through the lens of, this sophomore that's been here now for a year and a half and went through this. What if she's the one that her heart can't handle it well, and now, or her lungs, and now the rest of her career and her life is affected by us being reckless and not being as careful with it. So I like to hope that our parents who maybe don't think this is as serious as it is, especially for their daughter now, who, we've got some now, this is their second positive since they've been, over the course of 18 months or 2 years or whatever it is. I like to think that they at least understand that I'm trying to do the best I can to protect them while also playing these games. And I appreciate that, you get nervous even writing the tweet that I had to write Friday about, trying to do the best we can. And we've got to cancel these games this weekend, but we're trying to protect our team and our opponents. Like, you get nervous these days on Twitter, even writing that and worrying about some of the comments that can come from that. And,
Yes.
and like you said, just trying to navigate and find that middle ground. Like, what I really think about all this doesn't matter. Ultimately, what I think has to be the best thing for our 18 players. And if we don't have a chance to win a conference championship because we had to shut down for these 3 games, it's not that important. We missed out on as a coach, I've been to 6 Sweet 16s going back to Division II, never gotten past the round of 16. So that losing that year, 4 years ago or 2 years ago, it feels like 2 years ago, it's a big freaking deal to me, because I'm like, maybe this is finally my shot as a coach. It's not that important though. And the rest of my life hasn't been affected by this. So I'm not going to have a player that ends up with a long-term issue because I didn't take the paces and do the things that our program needs to do to protect these girls. And that's the part where an individual parent can sign off on their kid going back into it. But I've got parents that don't want to sign off on that. And I'm, have to think about all those things at the same time. And that's the challenge that, I feel like we've done a good job of protecting them and making sure that they feel like we're looking out for their best interests. But I know we've got frustrated people, and I guess I just want them to understand, and people that jump on Twitter understand that, man, we're trying to do the best we can. And I can't live with the idea that I put somebody at extra risk when we could have just wore a mask in a film session. You know what I mean? Like, there's little things like that, if you don't think it matters, that's fine. But if it might help, why wouldn't we try to help it out? So, that's the juggling act right now of knowing you've got parents and if they don't agree, and they've been very quiet about it with us, and they've allowed us to kind of do the best we can for what I think is the best for our team. So I appreciate that piece.
And that perspective is why that we wanted to do this, because again, Twitter, 100 whatever characters it is per tweet, it only gets you so far. But to hear you talk about whether people think one way or another about the pandemic, but to hear you talk about your personal perspective of it and how you're approaching it and how you value protecting the women that are part of the Oshkosh basketball team. I don't know how anyone could disagree with that side of it when they hear that perspective. At least that what I mean is they know that that's where you're coming from.
Yeah.
They may see it differently.
Right.
But to hear you explain how you think, that's how you think, right? I mean,
Yeah,
that's really important for people to see.
Yeah. And honestly, I get emotional talking about it because I know how much our girls have lost over the last 3 years. Like, for us to cancel our senior day, for the kids that came back to have another senior day and get a real senior day. Like, last year we didn't have parents, so we had to bring back our one senior we lost this year so that their parents could be there to hear her senior speech for her senior day. So we have all these things. So that, I think that's the part when I read stuff on Twitter about what you should do, and I sit there and go, you know what? We're doing everything we can. And the hard part is that we play 25 games that people tweet about and retweet and quote tweet, and Oshkosh is good, or they didn't play well tonight. But there's the other 340 days of the year that we have these kids, whether it's practice or academic meetings or their weddings 5 years from now. The stuff we're talking about here, affects all those things. And so everybody that has their take on what to do with the 25 days that the outside people care about need to understand the other 340 that we care about. And, telling these girls, since maybe going into their senior year of high school or even earlier for some of them, if you come here, we will treat you with respect. We will do everything we can to build a program that you want to be part of, that you want to stay at for 4 years, that you want to be an alumni of. You owe them every ounce of protection and respect, and trying to do the best for their health and their mental health. The mental health, we haven't even touched on what the mental health of these athletes is like over the course of these 3 years. But I get emotional just thinking about people out there trying to say that this is what you should do and this isn't that big of a deal, when all those other pieces are tied to it. And you can fire off those tweets and then go on and do your next thing. We don't get to go on and do the next thing here. Like, this is our thing. So when you're talking about what you've promised those parents, how you're going to take care of their daughters, and then having to try to make those decisions and juggle what you actually think might be the right thing with what's the best for the team, like, it makes me emotional to think about like how important those decisions actually are. And if you're going to err, to me, if you're not sure what to do, you err on the side of being more protective than you would being more loose. And, I worry about these girls for the next 50, 60 years of their life, not just, can we play this game against Stout next Saturday, which is kind of the next thing that we got to figure out.
Right.
And, I guess the rest of it at that point, I kind of don't care what people think, but I do think if people had understood that that's kind of the struggle that I think coaches, especially because we're so close to them, but then administrators too. If people understand that's the struggle we're going through right now to try to figure that out, I think I would hope there'd be a little more empathy towards all these decisions that are being made.
And the mental health side of it too. That's a great point. I was texting back and forth with a Division III head men's coach this morning, kind of on all this, and he was just sharing how the mental health side of it has been such a challenge for him personally and his players, and just kind of how fried everyone is. He was sharing, a good friend of his in Division III men's basketball is also in that same spot. And I was sharing that I was around the Illinois Wesleyan men's players a week and a half ago in New York at the Yeshiva game, and how I got the sense that the guys they're doing well and everything, but they're the number 3 rated team in the country, but yet they're all sort of like just fried, like they're mentally basketball great, but this is taking a toll on all of these student athletes. That's probably, I guess everyone has that perspective, but I think you'd agree, Brad, like that's a big part of this too, is like these kids have been through a lot for parts of 3 seasons now, right?
Yeah, and they're tired. Like, it's hard. I think I would guess similar to those guys that the prep that we put in to get ready for teams like for that game, for those guys against Yeshiva, like the scout report, the film, the attention to detail, like all the mental capacity it takes to do that well. And people are just tired, like they're mentally tired. And whether it's having to go test or the anxiety when you take a test, am I positive? And like, that's a little piece of it. But just that feeling again for especially the upperclassmen, of all the things they've lost along the way. And here's another thing, for our kids, here's senior day, just add it to the list, the list of things we've lost, and how that kind of beats you down and fatigues you. And you you start kind of feeling sorry for yourself, like, well, what's next? We lost a tough game and now we lost senior day. Like, what's the next bad thing that can happen? Just this is the place that can put you in, mentally from a day-to-day standpoint of coming to practice the next day and just being beaten down. And I think, that should be a moment where those guys are euphoric. Like, right. They broke that win streak and they're on the road and went to someone else's gym. And if you didn't get that feeling, that's a perfect example of how taxing this has been and how emotionally fatiguing it's been. And I don't know at what point we finally get out of this from that standpoint, but it's just an accumulation, and it just keeps building, and all of us are going through it in a different way. It's not just our team because we lost NCAA tournaments. There's teams that could have made their first NCAA tournament maybe in school history, or a senior that could have been a 1,000 point scorer or a school scorer. Like, there's so many of those things in each program. Coaches that just got their first head coaching job that year, and now their record is not what they want it to be, and they might get fired in 2 years because they didn't have a chance to have in-person meetings and build their culture. Like, every program, all sports is going through this fatigue. And again, I never want anyone to think that sports is so important that it overrides what the world's going through. Like, I don't think any of us think that, but for the space this takes up in our lives, like, it feels like a huge freaking deal. So I just think the accumulation, it's just a pile on effect. There's never been a chance to reset during this time. Like, you kind of felt like it maybe when this year started, but it came back so fast that there's no way you got back to ground zero. So now it just is an accumulation, and there's a breaking point for everybody where they're just going to get too tired to keep doing it. And that's the hard part. And I'm hoping there's a way, obviously, we can get through it, but also that we can give these kids a reset, because they've spent most of their college careers, if they're still playing, over half their college careers come during a pandemic. So there's no one left anywhere that has had less of a career, more of their career outside the pandemic than inside. And that's the nature of all of it right now.
As we start to wrap up, and I appreciate you've been really generous with your time, especially since, we just hatched this on the fly and said, should we do this? Let's do this.
Yeah.
Just a comment on my side is, I think the reason we wanted to do this is just to give people perspective. I think reading a tweet only gets you so far, but to listen to Brad talk about things from his side, wherever you are on the virus and how dangerous it is, whatever side you're on that front, what you can't disagree with is that Brad is sharing very personally what this means to him and how it impacts how he leads his program. And so I appreciate all of your heartfelt thoughts on this, Brad, and appreciate you jumping on and being willing to do this. I want to give you final thoughts here before we wrap up. A lot of your parents, your fans, a lot of people around Division III will listen to this on the men's basketball side, the women's basketball side, other sports. Just what would you share with people as we start to wrap this up?
Yeah, I mean, again, I think the biggest thing is that we're lucky in Division III that people care. I was at Division II for a stretch of time and never felt the passion for any individual schools or the division as a whole. And obviously, in Wisconsin, it's a huge deal because it's kind of the makeup of our state. But I assume this is what the Division I schools go through, and we don't have the same Twitter engagement that Wisconsin Badgers would, or Illinois, any of those. But when it does come out, and when you do fire out the tweets about trying to judge what's happening, the real life piece of all of these things that all of us go through is even more so at Division III. Like, our salaries don't put us in a position where we can just live freely. I'm not living on a country club, and this is not putting us in a mansion. So this is no different a job for me than it is for most of the people that are weighing in on this. But I think the human side of what we're going through right now completely dwarfs the results of these games and the rankings and where teams are at and who can go to the national championship. So I think we need some perspective on how important that stuff is when we think we're telling people how they should be handling what they think is a simple solution to not testing or not caring about asymptomatic or not thinking about, and that we all got to go home to our families. Like, I think on Coach Lewis on our men's side, like, he's got twin babies that obviously can't get vaccines. Like, we have all those pieces to everyone's puzzle that, especially at Division III, because they're not getting scholarships, like, they're in the middle of this by choice, but they also are living, a more normal life than almost any student athlete in the country. So, that's where the empathy piece and the trying to understand how difficult this is before thinking that you have the answer to it has become important to me. And I have friends that wait in this sleep. Why would you have to cancel on Saturday? And like, well, this is it's just how it is. And trying to remind people that, the great part about Division III is most of us like it because it's so humanizing. Like, they're there for the passion of playing. They're there because, they're willing to go to this school to sign up for this belief in being something bigger than themselves. They're not being enticed to come. They're not being talked into it. So if we're going to appreciate Division III for that piece of it, in this situation, this would be a great time to understand and remember the thing you like about it is one of the things that makes it hard.
Right.
And makes it, for me, more important to worry about their health and their mental health and all those things. And they're not going on ESPN, and they're not getting huge NILs and all those things. So if we love it for that reason, we should also respect it right now and in the most human sense that it's just been really hard. So if your team cancels a game and you think it's stupid, take a step back and understand that whoever made that decision had to go through a lot of tough conversations, and there's something going on behind the scenes that you have no clue about, and that's okay. And you can still feel the way you do, but at least take a step back to remember that, because everything you like about Division III makes a lot of these decisions why they're happening, and it's why certain schools are shutting down, and you may not agree with it, but there's been a lot of thought put into it, and most of it is because people do care about people, and that's the best part about Division III is I think we all still care about our athletes as people first, and that's the part that I hope people can understand when these decisions are being made.
There's a hashtag we use a lot, which is YD3, and I think just in wrapping this up, what I would say is this is one of those YD3 moments, and there's about 1,000 of them. But in Division I, you'd never have the head coach of the 18th ranked team women's basketball program probably interacting with you on Twitter, and you certainly then wouldn't have that head coach getting on a podcast with you a few hours later to talk about it. So to your point about kind of what we love about Division III, it's very unique. I think your willingness, Brad, to come on here today and talk about this is a shining example of that. I will certainly be rooting for the Oshkosh Titans, certainly be rooting for you to break through the Sweet 16 this year.
Someday.
You were left in Holland, Michigan, and maybe this is that year. But really, really sincerely appreciate this. And let's just kind of leave folks with what we talked about earlier. Don't start hanging your head quite yet and thinking that doom and gloom season's over. We're back to 2 years ago. I don't believe that.
Agreed.
And I think you and I both agree that the sun's going to come out in this thing here as we get towards February and March. So let's stay positive, because we're in a much different place. I think we both agree there.
Yeah, for sure. And I appreciate it, Bob. Thanks for having me on. And I hope people can understand how much we care about these kids and just want to try to figure out the best way to do all this.
That's Brad Fischer, the head women's basketball coach of the Wisconsin Oshkosh Titans, ranked 18th in Division III, having an amazing season. That was season 2, episode 11 of the QCast. Brad, thank you so much, and good luck to the Titans.
Thank you, Bob.